wolf chose us, not the other way around. Every dog alive today, every breed, every size, every shape, traces back to a single population of wolves that decided humans were worth tolerating, not wolves that humans caught, not wolves that humans trained, wolves that walked toward the fire on their own. And that decision, made by animals we didn't control, changed both species forever. To understand how, you have to go back roughly 15,000 years, maybe further. The exact number is still debated, but the direction of the evidence is not. Somewhere in Eurasia, most likely across a broad corridor stretching from what is now Central Asia through parts of Europe, a group of ancient gray wolves was living near the edges of human camps, not inside them, not pets, not captives, just near. Close enough to smell the fire, close enough to hear the voices, close enough to smell the scraps. Humans at this point were not farmers. They were mobile hunters, following herds across open land, making temporary camps, leaving behind bones and offal and the messy refuse of a kill. To most wolves, a human camp was a danger signal, predators in competition, loud, unpredictable, something to avoid, and most wolves did avoid it, but not all of them. Some wolves had a slightly different wiring, a slightly lower fear response, a slightly higher curiosity threshold, not tame, nothing like tame, but fractionally less reactive to the presence of humans than the rest of the pack. These wolves could linger at the edge of a camp longer without fleeing. They could return the next night, and the night after that, and because they could do that, they had access to something the fearful wolves did not: easy calories, discarded bones, half-eaten carcasses, the permanent buffet of human waste. And here is where the self-selection begins. These slightly bolder, slightly calmer wolves ate more. They survived harder winters more easily. They reproduced more reliably. Their pups inherited that fractional calmness. Those pups grew up even closer to humans, ate even more scraps, reproduced even more successfully. Generation by generation, without a single human making a single intentional choice, the population of camp-edge wolves was drifting toward tolerance, drifting toward us. The fearful wolves went one way, these wolves went another, and the two groups slowly stopped interbreeding. A split was forming, not a decision, a drift. Scientists studying the genetics of modern dogs and ancient wolf populations have traced this divergence and found something remarkable. The ancestor of the domestic dog was not a wolf that still exists today. The gray wolf we see now and the domestic dog share a common ancestor, an ancient wolf population that has since gone extinct in its original form. One branch of that population became modern wolves, the other branch became dogs. The split happened before agriculture, before pottery, before permanent settlements. It happened while humans were still wandering. Which means no farmer woke up one morning and said, "I will now domesticate a wolf." The process was already deep in motion before any human had the infrastructure to even attempt that. But there is more. Because the wolves were not just changing in behavior, they were changing in body. This is one of the stranger parts of the story. When animals self-select for reduced fear and increased tolerance of social contact, a cluster of traits researchers now call the domestication syndrome. Something unexpected happens to their physical form. Their skulls shorten slightly, their ears sometimes fold, their tails sometimes curve. Coat colors diversify. Juvenile features persist into adulthood, a process called neoteny. The animals begin to look, in subtle ways, younger and softer than their wild counterparts. Not because anyone bred them for cuteness, but because the same genetic pathways that govern fear response also govern development, pigmentation, and skull formation. Pull on one thread, and the whole fabric shifts. This is not a theory invented for dogs. The same syndrome has been observed in every independently domesticated animal, in cattle, in pigs, in goats. And it was demonstrated in a remarkable experiment that began in Siberia in 1959. A Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev started selectively breeding silver foxes, not for appearance, not for trainability, but purely for one trait: reduced fear of humans. He only bred the foxes that showed the least aggression and the least flight response when approached. Within just a few generations, something extraordinary happened. The foxes began to behave like dogs. They wagged their tails, they sought human contact, they whimpered when people left. And then the physical changes came: floppy ears, spotted coats, curled tails, shorter snouts. Belyaev had not bred for any of these features. He had bred for calmness. And calmness dragged everything else along with it. The experiment proved that the entire package of domestication, behavior and body, can emerge from a single selection pressure. And that pressure, in the case of wolves 15,000 years ago, was not applied by human hands. It was applied by the camp scraps at the edge of the fire. So when did humans actually get involved? Gradually, almost passively at first. The wolves that were hanging around camp weren't just eating, they were also, incidentally, doing something useful. Barking at strangers, alerting the camp to approaching predators, chasing off rival scavengers. Humans started to notice. Not to engineer, to notice. A wolf that barked when something unfamiliar approached was a wolf that was useful. A wolf that ran when you reached toward it was a wolf that was not. Slowly, almost without deliberate intention, humans began rewarding the calmer animals, tossing food closer, letting pups that lingered stay. The ones that fled, fled. The ones that stayed, stayed. Selection was still happening. But now, humans were a second filter layered on top of the first. By the time humans began to intentionally breed dogs, to actually select for specific traits, the hard work had already been done. The fundamental rewiring of the wolf into something that could live beside a person without constant terror had taken thousands of years of self-directed drift. What humans did later was variation. They took a creature that was already domesticated in its bones and began sculpting it. Herding dogs, hunting dogs, guard dogs, lap dogs, all of those came later. All of those were human decisions. But the original domestication, the root event, was a wolf's decision. A wolf that was calmer than its neighbors. A wolf that could eat from the edge of a fire without running. A wolf whose descendants inherited that calmness and passed it forward, generation after generation, until one day, the creature standing at the edge of the human camp was no longer quite a wolf at all. There is something almost humbling about this. Humans have spent thousands of years believing we domesticated the dog. We tell it as a story of human ingenuity and mastery. We looked at a wild predator and we tamed it. But the evidence says something more complicated and stranger. We were bystanders to the first act. The wolf found us first. The wolf made the first move. The wolf crossed the distance. Whatever ancient human sat at that fire 15,000 years ago and heard something moving in the dark, the wolf on the other side of that darkness had already been moving toward that moment for generations, already selected, already softened, already choosing, in the only way a wolf can choose, to be close. And the relationship that formed from that mutual proximity turned out to be one of the most successful partnerships in the history of life on this planet. Dogs are the most abundant large carnivore on Earth. There are nearly 1 billion of them. They live on every continent. They have survived the collapse of every civilization that bred them. They have outlasted the megafauna, the mammoths, the dire wolves, the giant sloths, everything else the late Pleistocene took with it. They survived because they were useful to us, but they were useful to us because they first made themselves approachable. Everything that followed, every breed, every working dog, every animal sleeping on a couch tonight, began with a wolf that was slightly less afraid than the others. The wolf did not wait to be chosen. It chose. And every dog alive today is the proof. When you look at a dog, any size, any shape, staring up at you with that particular kind of patient, open attention that no other animal quite manages, you are looking at the descendant of an animal that looked at humans and moved closer instead of away. An animal that read the situation and made a different calculation than every other predator on the plain. And that calculation worked. It worked so completely that the creature making it no longer exists as a separate species. It became something new, something that had never existed before. Not a wolf, not a pet, a partner. Built not by human intention, but by the slow, quiet pressure of proximity, of tolerance, of choosing, again and again across thousands of generations, to stay near the fire. Humans didn't tame the wolf. The wolf tamed itself. And then it tamed us right back.